Today we'll be dealing with something that is important, fascinating, and interesting for all of us, especially in the context in which we live. So today we'll be looking at the elements and certain myths of human communication. In today's world, we see that we humans make extensive use of technology in order to communicate with others. But one thing that we need to note that the effective use of technologies does not guarantee effective communication. Now we see with the advent of modernization, globalization, and with various developments and advancements taking place, the senders need to make sure that the communication process is in accordance with the needs and requirements of the receivers. At the same time, they also need to make sure that they are in pace or they are in check with what is happening around them. In other words, they need to be aware of the signs of the time and they need to adapt and react according to that. Now, there are many elements which play a part in the process of communication, but there are five main elements that we will be looking in today's episode. And these are the ones that are the basic elements which help us in the process of communicating with one another. So the first one is the sender. Now, as the term suggests, sender is the one who basically sends the message to the receiver. So sender begins the communication process, and he does this by forming ideas, intentions, and feelings that will be transmitted. Now, as a sender, you are required to filter out the details that are unimportant, and you should focus your time and energy on information that is relevant and information that is useful for the sender. Now, at the same time, it is said it is the source makes the decision to communicate. It is he who begins the process, he takes the decision and thus communicates what he has to communicate to the other person. Now, it's also said that it is the sender who determines the purpose of the communication. As we have established that the sender is the one who takes the decision to communicate, he therefore also needs to have a purpose. Because if he does not have a purpose to communicate, we see that that communication will be haphazard, it will be haywired, and it will not have any proper balance with it. So therefore, knowing the purpose of communication is very essential and important. So it is said that first the source or the sender must encode or create a message. Now, encoding is basically putting a message in a form that can be then transmitted to the receiver. So after the source has put the message in a form so that it can be transmitted, he also will then try to look at various means by which he can then transmit that message to the receiver. Now, the source generates a message including his thoughts, experiences, feelings, etc. So, in a way, we see that our past experiences also play a very important role when it comes to the mood and the type of communication that the sender does. Now, the next element that we come to is the receiver. As you can understand by the term receiver, receiver refers to the person who attends to the source's message. Now, the act of interpreting messages is called decoding. So, as we said, the sender encodes the message. So, he puts the message in a form so that it can be transmitted. Now, once the receiver receives the message, he then decodes it. That means he then makes the message into a form which is readable and understanding, and so that he can understand what the sender has been trying to tell. Now, it is said that receivers decode messages based on past experiences. Apart from that, also perceptions, thoughts, and feelings play a very important role. Now, most of the messages are decoded by listening or seeing. That means we use all our senses in order to receive messages in various forms. But most of these messages are decoded by listening or seeing. So these two senses play a very major role when it comes to decoding messages that are sent by the sender. Now, let's come to the process of reception. So first here we have the reception of the stimuli. So whenever anything has been passed on to us, we first need to receive it, because unless we receive it, we then will not be able to decode and understand or interpret it. And therefore we see that we need to pay attention to both the verbal as well as the non-verbal stimuli, which is constantly bombarding us. Then we need to pay attention to how we can reduce this stimuli and then how we can adapt it to the particular context. So we need to understand the stimuli and also interpret it in the best possible manner. So a perfect example of this is when we hear some noise, we directly know whether it is a phone call or whether it is a doorbell or whether somebody has been calling us across the hall. So by our experience, by our knowledge, we know that certain sounds are associated with certain devices. And in this way, it makes the process of decoding, it makes the process of reception far more easier. Next, the one who receives the message also stores information for later use, so that whenever next time any information is required, he can easily reach out and get that information and use it very quickly. Now, it is important to remember that receivers make immediate decisions about what they will respond to a given situation. And in this way, we see that sometimes the reflexes have to be quick. Sometimes you need to be quick in taking decisions. You need to be quick in making certain judgments. And for this, you do not have a lot of time to decode, to interpret the messages as you would want it. So this comes with experience, and also this comes when there's a lot of confidence and trust with regards to the sender and the receiver. Next important element is the context. Now, as the term suggests, context refers to the setting in which the communication takes place. Now, the context helps in establishing the meaning, and it has an impact on what is stated and, most importantly, on how it is stated. Now, we see that context can be classified into 4 types. Now, which are these 4 types? Well, we have the physical context, cultural context, social psychological context, and the temporal context. Now, the physical context refers to the concrete environment. So that is a workplace, home, office, etc. Cultural basically refers to the culture in which we live. And then we also have the social psychological context and the temporal context, which also includes space and time. Now we see that context is regarded as an indispensable element of communication, and this enables the individuals to take into account certain essential attributes. So we see that every place has its own rules, and these rules tend to influence the communication process. So we see that context plays a very important role in what is communicated and how it is communicated. For example, in certain situations, you cannot react in a particular manner. For example, when the mood is sad, you cannot go about laughing or cheering up others. So sometimes you need to be very cautious of the situation around you. For example, in certain countries, you can't speak about certain issues in public. And in this way, we see that being aware of the culture, being aware of the context is useful for both the sender in order how he is going to send the message, and also for the receiver in how he will be responding to that message. So therefore, we see that context plays an important part and is an important element of human communication. Next is the channel. Now, channel basically refers to the means, medium, manner, or method through which the message is passed by the sender to the receiver. Now, it is said that the channel needs to be suitable to the needs of the senders or receivers. Now, depending on the receiver, the sender will use a particular type of medium in order to send the message. Let's take an example here. Now, suppose the receiver is a person who is not well versed in technology. In this way, you cannot expect the sender to send a message through LinkedIn or through Messenger. For example, if the person is not using Facebook, it is no point that the sender sends a message to the receiver on Facebook, because the receiver will not be able to receive it. And therefore, the sender needs to be aware of the needs of the receiver, the way the receiver functions. And in this way, he will send the message according using the appropriate medium. Now, when it comes to the communication channels, well, we see that the, there are two types normally. First is the physical transmission medium, such as wire, or we can also have the logical connection through a medium, which includes radio channel in the communication process, or it can also include telecommunications, computer networking, electronics, technologies, and multimedia. So when we speak about physical transmission medium, it is something that goes directly from one end to the other. Whereas when it comes to logical connection through a medium, it is through an other medium that is used in order to send the message. For example, we see that most of the computer networkings make use of the internet. Similarly, most of the technologies today run on internet. There are few in the past that used to use technologies such as Bluetooth and infrared to transfer information. But now, as we see, that most of the things need to be connected on the internet in order to sync devices with one another. It is also said that in order to ensure that the information is imparted to the receiver in an appropriate manner, it is also necessary to make selection of appropriate channels. And therefore, it is stated that the implementation of appropriate channels contributes to promoting interest and also promoting willingness in the process of communication. And we come to the last element of communication, that is message. Now, message includes both verbal and non-verbal messages. So when it comes to message, here we see that it is both the senders as well as the receivers who participate in this process of implementing whether the message to be passed is verbal or non-verbal. So when it comes to verbal messages, we all know that verbal message basically refers to the use of sounds or words that are used to express oneself and in order to communicate from one source to another. Now, it is said that verbal messages are important as they are regarded as key for the maintenance of relationship. Now, we know that through verbal communication, it becomes much more simpler to communicate because you tell the message as it is intended. Sometimes when it comes to non-verbal communication, there is also the element of how the message will be interpreted. And we see that if the message is interpreted inappropriately, it could have other consequences. So non-verbal messages, as we have already dealt in the past, deals with using certain messages or signals using eye contact, facial expression, gestures, postures, and body language. Now, making use of these means can basically give additional information and clues and meaning over verbal communication. So, as we said, non-verbal messages have been regarded as significant and meaningful to individuals in a large number of ways. Now, these basically include reinforcing or modifying what has been specified in words. It also involves conveying information in terms of the emotional state of the person and also describing and strengthening the terms and relationships among individuals, as well as providing feedback to others and regulating the flow of information. Now, at the same time, we see that nonverbal messages are conscious as well as unconscious at the same time. So, therefore, we see that we need to make sure what kind of message we want to transmit. Based on that, we also select the type of medium. And also, in this way, we need to be aware of how the receiver is well equipped to receive that particular message. So therefore, we see that it is all these elements coming together, playing their part in order to facilitate the process of communication. Now let us look at some of the myths of human communication. Now, as we know, whenever people speak about human communication, they may have their own worldviews, their own opinions, their own statements about human communication. And for us, as we are beginning the study of human communication, what is really important and essential is that we need to separate the myths from the facts. Because if we listen and understand something that is false, then a whole process, a whole understanding of the subject will then be a bit flawed. So first we need to clear out what are the myths, and then we shall look at what are the facts. So we shall analyze a few statements here and see whether they are true or false. Now, the first statement says, good communicators are born, not made. Now, obviously, we will say that this statement is false because you can develop your communication skills by working hard and you can become a very good communicator. The second statement states the more a couple communicates, the better their relationship will be. Well, this again we see this statement is false because it's not necessary the more a couple communicates, but how they communicate, which also plays an important role. The third statement says when two people are in a close relationship for a long period of time, one person should not have to communicate his or her needs and wants. The other person should know what these are. Well, we see that the whole purpose of communication is to communicate to one another. And if we do not know the needs of others, then how can we respond to those needs? And if we have not told the other person what are our needs, what are our liking, and what are our dislikes, it is difficult for the other person to judge because the other person will not get a dream about what we require. And therefore, we see that this third statement is also false. The fourth statement says complete openness should be the goal of any meaningful interpersonal relationship. Well, we see that openness, frankness, honesty is good, but whether complete openness is essential and is very important or is the goal, we shall look at it later. But at the moment, we can say that this statement also is false. The fifth statement states interpersonal or group conflict is a reliable sign that the relationship or group is in trouble. Well, it's not necessary because sometimes conflicts or disagreements are good because, in a way, it also tends to build up the group. So, it is not necessary that it means that the group is in trouble or the group is in a chaotic state. The sixth statement states, like good communicators, leaders are born, not made. Well, again, we can say that leaders and leadership is something that we pick up along the way. And in this manner, we can say that if one practices, if one develops skills, he or she can become a good leader. So once again, this sixth statement is false. Next, we see fear of speaking in public is detrimental and must be eliminated. So yes, we say that fear of speaking should be eliminated, but in a way we see that this is something that also is overcome with practice, with experience. It's only once a person gains confidence, he is then able to move out of this fear. Now, having looked at all these myths, let us take a look at some of the facts of human communication. Now, first is effective communication is a learned skill. Now we see that sometimes some people are born brighter or some by nature are more extrovert than the others. But even those who are introvert, they can overcome their condition by various methods and they can learn skills of communication and thus they can become effective communicators. So we see that effective communication is something that can be learned. We can pick it up along the way and thus we can become effective communicators. Next, learn and follow the principles of effectiveness. Now, if you practice bad communications habits, you're more likely to grow less effective than to become more effective. And therefore, it is important for us to learn and follow the principles of effectiveness. And therefore, we need to know how to communicate effectively. And therefore, we see that this whole study of philosophy of human communication deals exactly with that in the way that we need to communicate, what are the principles, and how we can communicate effectively. Nobody can read minds. This is a true fact. Now, this assumption we see is at the heart of many interpersonal difficulties. Now, people cannot read the minds of others, and to assume that they are merely set up barriers to open and honest communication. And therefore, we see that what is important here is that sometimes when we feel that people already know our thoughts, we don't feel like communicating. And thus, we see that this becomes a barrier to the whole process of communication. Next, being totally honest is not the effective strategy. Although we see that sometimes you may feel ethically obliged to be totally honest, it is generally not an effective strategy. In fact, it is said that complete, okay, of anything is a bad idea. So I remember a quite famous statement that was one told to me. You be honest or be open, but do not be naked. So that means you reveal yourself. You need to also reveal yourself when you're communicating to others, but you need not tell each and everything. You therefore need to filter out what you want to be honest about, what you want to communicate with others. And therefore, we see that being totally honest is also not an effective strategy, because then it could be used against you, or you could be made use of. Next, we see that both people can win. Now, here we see that interpersonal conflict, or whenever there is a conflict, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that one has to win or one has to lose. Both people can also win at certain times. And sometimes we also see that in the conflict, even though you may lose on an agreement, but in the long run, you may have gained something. So, in this way, we see that whenever it comes to interpersonal conflict, you need to be calm and you need to be positive about that situation. And in this way, you will be able to overcome the situation and be at ease with yourself as well as with others. Now, leadership is a learned skill. Now, we see that just as we spoke about communication, we can develop leadership skills as well. And thus, through proper training, through appropriate guidance, one can become a good leader. Now, managing fear is important. Now, most speakers are nervous. So, therefore, managing that fear is very important, because some amount of fear is also good, because it thus pushes you to practice a bit more. It also pushes you to give out your best. And therefore, we see that managing that fear is very important. How you manage the fear, how you face the situation will test your skills and will also make you an effective communicator and an effective leader. So this is for all this episode of Communication How, wherein we have looked at the elements of human communication, we have seen the myths, and also we have looked at the facts. So by eliminating the myths, we have now come to the facts of human communication. And if we pay attention to these facts, we will see that we will be able to incorporate the principles of human communication into our day to day lives. And thus, we too will become effective communicators and effective leaders when it comes to performing, or when it comes to delivering a particular activity or performing a particular required goal. So, next time, we will be dealing with some more concepts of human communication, namely the theories. So, till then, thank you for watching. And till we meet again, let us focus on being good communicators by understanding the basics of communication and focusing on what is necessary and important to communicate. Thank you.